The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty general store, and Florence Katherine pressed her trembling hand against the cracked leather seat, trying to steady herself for what she knew would be a life of misery. The journey from Philadelphia to Chloride, Arizona, had taken 3 grueling weeks, and every mile had given her more time to imagine the brutish man who had sent for her, the rough hands that would likely strike her, the harsh voice that would command her like livestock. She was 22 years old, penniless after her father's debts had consumed everything, and this marriage to a stranger named Yale Yardley was her only option besides the workhouse or worse. The door swung open, and the driver offered his calloused hand to help her down. Florence gathered her worn carpetbag, smoothed her faded blue traveling dress that had once been her mother's, and stepped into the blazing Arizona sun of July 1882. The heat hit her like a physical wall, so different from the humid summers back east. Dust swirled around her boots, and she squinted against the brightness, searching the handful of weathered faces for the man who would own her future. "Miss Katherine." The voice was gentle, almost uncertain, and she turned to find a tall man approaching with something clutched in his sun-browned hands. He wore clean denim pants and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, a tan vest over it, and a well-worn hat that shaded eyes the color of creek water in spring. But what made her breath catch was not his appearance, though he was certainly handsome in a rugged way that made her heart skip unexpectedly. It was what he held: wildflowers. A bouquet of desert marigolds and brittlebush blooms, their golden petals bright against his work-roughened palms. And he was smiling, not with the cruel smirk she had braced herself for, but with genuine warmth and what looked remarkably like nervousness. "I am Florence Katherine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She had prepared herself for many things, but kindness had not been among them. "Yale Yardley, madam, I am pleased to finally meet you." He extended the flowers toward her, and she noticed his hands were shaking slightly. "I picked these this morning. I know they are not much compared to what you must be used to back in Philadelphia, but they are the prettiest things that grow around here." Florence took the bouquet with numb fingers, staring at the cheerful blooms as if they might disappear. In all her imaginings during the long journey west, never once had she pictured flowers. Never once had she imagined a gentle smile or a voice that held respect rather than ownership. Her eyes burned with sudden tears, and she blinked rapidly, trying to maintain her composure. "They are beautiful," she managed, and was surprised to find she meant it. These wild desert flowers, gathered by a stranger trying to make her feel welcome, touched something deep in her chest that had been frozen since the day she had agreed to become a mail-order bride. "Your trunk is being unloaded," Yale said, glancing at the stagecoach. "I have a wagon waiting. The ranch is about 5 miles outside town. I hope the journey was not too terrible." "It was long," Florence admitted, still clutching the flowers. She studied him more openly now, trying to reconcile this soft-spoken cowboy with the letters they had exchanged, brief and practical missives arranged through the agency. He had been honest about his circumstances: a rancher with a modest spread, no family left, looking for a wife to share his life. She had been honest too, or as honest as desperation allowed, writing that she was educated, healthy, and willing to work hard. Neither had written anything about kindness or flowers or gentle smiles. Yale collected her trunk with ease, his tall frame making the heavy luggage seem almost light. Another man helped him load it into a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 patient horses. Florence climbed onto the bench seat, still holding her flowers as if they were something precious, and Yale settled beside her, taking up the reins with capable hands. As they rolled out of Chloride, Florence studied the landscape with wide eyes. Red rock formations jutted from the earth like ancient monuments, and scrub brush dotted the sandy soil. Mountains rose in the distance, purple in the afternoon haze. It was so different from the green hills and cobblestone streets of home that it might as well have been another planet. "It takes some getting used to," Yale said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "The desert, I mean. When I first came out here from Missouri 7 years ago, I thought I had made a terrible mistake. Everything seemed dead or dying. But once you learn to see it properly, there is beauty here. Life finds a way, even in the harshest places." "Why did you leave Missouri?" Florence asked, grateful for conversation that kept her mind from spiraling into anxiety about what would happen when they reached the ranch. "My parents both passed from fever when I was 19. Lost my younger sister the same year. There was nothing keeping me there but sad memories, so I sold the farm and headed west. Worked as a ranch hand for a few years, saved my money, and eventually bought my own place." He paused, his jaw tightening slightly. "It is a good life, but it is lonely. A man can only talk to cattle and horses for so long before he starts to lose his mind." Despite her nervousness, Florence felt a small smile tug at her lips. "I imagine the cattle are not very good conversationalists." "Terrible," Yale agreed, and she caught the hint of humor in his voice. "They never laugh at my jokes, and they are always interrupting." The smile grew, surprising her. When had she last smiled genuinely? Not since before her father's death, surely. Not since the creditors had come and taken everything, leaving her with nothing but her mother's old dresses and the stark choice between marriage to a stranger or starvation. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the wagon wheels creaking, the horses' hooves making soft thuds in the dusty road. The sun beat down relentlessly, and Florence felt sweat gathering at her temples, dampening her collar. She had never experienced heat like this, dry and intense, stealing moisture from the air itself. "I should warn you," Yale said suddenly. "The ranch house is not fancy. It is solid, weatherproof, and I have done my best to make it comfortable, but it is nothing like what you must be accustomed to." Florence almost laughed but caught herself. He thought she came from comfort, from ease. The truth was far different. "Mr. Yardley, I have not lived in luxury for some time. My expectations are quite reasonable." He glanced at her, those creek water eyes searching her face. "Yale, please. If we are to be married, I would like you to use my given name." "Yale," she repeated, testing the shape of it. "And you should call me Florence." "Florence." The way he said it, careful and respectful, made something flutter in her chest. "It suits you." The ranch appeared as they crested a low rise, and Florence leaned forward to take it in. A sturdy wooden house with a covered porch sat in a small valley, surrounded by corrals and outbuildings. Trees, actual trees with green leaves, clustered near the house, suggesting water nearby. Cattle grazed in the distance, moving slowly in the heat. It was modest, certainly, but there was something appealing about it, something honest and real. Yale pulled the wagon up near the porch and set the brake. He climbed down and came around to help Florence, his hands careful at her waist as he lifted her to the ground. She was acutely aware of his strength, the solid warmth of him, but there was nothing threatening in his touch. He released her immediately and stepped back, giving her space. "Let me show you inside," he said, gathering her trunk. "I imagine you would like to freshen up after such a long journey." The house was dim and blessedly cool after the blazing sun. Florence's eyes adjusted slowly, revealing a main room with a stone fireplace, a worn but clean sofa, a table with 4 chairs, and a kitchen area with a cast iron stove. Everything was neat, almost painfully so, as if Yale had scrubbed and organized repeatedly in preparation for her arrival. "Your room is through here," Yale said, carrying her trunk through a doorway. Florence followed, her heart hammering. But instead of leading her to his bedroom as she had feared, he showed her into a small separate room with a single bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the valley. The bed was made with obvious care, a quilt in shades of blue and cream covering it. Wildflowers, the same golden blooms from her bouquet, stood in a jar on the dresser. "I thought you might want your own space," Yale said, setting down her trunk. His ears had gone slightly red. "Until you are comfortable, until you are ready. I will sleep in the main room. There is no rush for anything. I want you to feel safe here, Florence." She stared at him, this stranger who was giving her the one thing she had not dared hope for: time, choice. The ability to come to this marriage on her own terms rather than having it forced upon her. The burning sensation returned to her eyes, and this time she could not stop the tears from spilling over. "I am sorry," she gasped, mortified by her own emotion. "I did not mean to be so foolish." "You are not foolish." Yale's voice was gentle, but he stayed in the doorway, not approaching. "You have traveled across the country to marry a man you have never met. You have every right to whatever feelings you have. Please take your time. Rest. There is water in the pitcher for washing. I will be outside tending to the animals. When you are ready, come out and I will show you around properly." He left, pulling the door partially closed behind him, and Florence sank onto the bed, clutching her wilted flowers. She could hear him moving in the main room, then the sound of the front door opening and closing. Slowly, the tears stopped, replaced by a strange, fragile feeling she could not quite name. It was not happiness, not yet, but it was something like the possibility of happiness. Hope, perhaps, tentative and uncertain. She washed her face and hands in the basin, changed from her traveling dress into a simpler cotton work dress, and pinned her dark hair more securely. The face that looked back at her from the small mirror over the dresser was thin, tired, with shadows under brown eyes that had seen too much loss. But there was color in her cheeks now, put there by the Arizona sun and perhaps by something else. Outside, she found Yale in one of the corrals, checking over a roan mare with a patient, thorough touch. He looked up when she approached, and that gentle smile returned. "Feeling better?" he asked. "Yes, thank you." Florence leaned on the fence rail, watching him work. "She is beautiful." "This is Rosie, sweetest horse I have ever known. I thought perhaps she could be yours if you ride." "I used to," Florence said. "It has been a long time." "Well, Rosie will be patient with you. She is good at that." Yale gave the mare a final pat and let himself out of the corral. "Let me show you the rest. The well is over here, good deep water. The hen house is there, 12 laying hens. The barn houses the other horses and has space for hay storage. I have about 200 head of cattle spread across the grazing land. It is not a huge operation, but it provides a decent living." As he walked her around the property, pointing out various features and explaining the daily routine, Florence began to relax incrementally. Yale spoke to her as an equal, asking her opinion on things, inquiring about her skills and interests. When she mentioned she could sew, he brightened. "That is wonderful. I am terrible at mending. My socks all have holes I keep meaning to fix." "I could help with that," Florence offered. "And with cooking, cleaning, the garden if you have one. There is a small plot behind the house, but I have not had much success with it. My mother had the gift for growing things. I seem to be better with animals than plants." He paused, then added carefully, "But I do not expect you to work yourself to exhaustion, Florence. This will be your home too. I hope you will feel free to make it comfortable for yourself." They ate dinner as the sun set, a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and preserved peaches that Yale had clearly prepared before meeting her in town. He asked about her journey, about Philadelphia, about her life before. Florence found herself sharing more than she had intended, the words spilling out about her father's failed business, the debts, the humiliation of having to sell everything. Yale listened without judgment, his expression sympathetic. "I am sorry you went through that," he said when she finished. "But I am grateful it brought you here. I know this is not what you would have chosen if circumstances were different, but I promise I will do my best to be a good husband to you. I will never raise my hand to you or speak to you with cruelty. You have my word on that." "Why?" Florence asked, the question bursting out before she could stop it. "Why are you being so kind to me? You do not know me. I could be terrible, difficult, mean-spirited." Yale considered this seriously. "I suppose I could be those things too. But I figured we both deserve a chance to show our best selves to each other. My father was hard on my mother, though he never struck her. He was just cold, demanding. I watched her wilt under it, and I swore I would never be that way. Every person deserves respect and kindness, Florence. Especially the person you are going to spend your life with." That night, Florence lay in her small bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the desert night. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The wind whispered through the eaves. And in the main room, she could hear the soft sounds of Yale settling onto the sofa, giving up his own bed so she could have privacy and safety. She thought about the flowers, wilting now in their jar but still beautiful. She thought about his gentle smile, his patient explanations, his promise of time and choice. And she thought that maybe, just maybe, she had been granted a miracle in the harsh Arizona desert. The next morning, Florence woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. She dressed quickly and emerged to find Yale at the stove, his hair damp as if he had already been out to the well to wash. "Good morning," he said. "I hope I did not wake you. I am used to rising early." "I am an early riser too," Florence assured him. "May I help?" They worked together to finish preparing breakfast, and Florence noticed how careful Yale was not to crowd her in the small kitchen space, always stepping back to give her room. They ate together, and then Yale showed her how to collect eggs from the henhouse, introducing her to each bird by name as if they were honored guests. "This is Henrietta, the boss of them all. And that is Mabel, who has a terrible attitude. Constance there is the best layer. And the little brown one is Juniper. She is shy but sweet." Florence could not help but laugh at his serious demeanor while discussing chicken personalities. "You really do talk to the animals." "I warned you," Yale said, grinning. "I have been alone too long." Over the following days, they fell into a routine. Yale worked the ranch, riding out early to check on cattle, mending fences, tending to the 100 tasks that kept the place running. Florence took over the cooking and housework, finding satisfaction in creating order and comfort. She mended his socks, all of them, and started on his shirts. She experimented with the garden, coaxing water from the well to irrigate stubborn vegetables. In the evenings, they sat on the porch and talked as the sky turned brilliant shades of orange and pink. Yale told her about his life, the years of hard work building the ranch, the challenges of drought and disease and market prices. Florence shared memories of Philadelphia, of her mother teaching her to sew, of her father before the business failures had turned him bitter and desperate. "Do you miss it?" Yale asked one evening. "The city," Florence considered this carefully. "I miss who I was there before everything fell apart, but the city itself? No. It was crowded and dirty and full of people who pretended to care but vanished the moment there was trouble. Here, everything is honest. The land, the work, you." Yale looked at her in the fading light, something warm in his expression. "I am glad you see it that way. I was worried you would hate it here." "I was worried about many things," Florence admitted. "None of them have come true." 2 weeks after her arrival, Florence was in the kitchen making bread when Yale came in looking troubled. "There is a social in town tomorrow night," he said. "A dance at the church hall. I had forgotten about it, but Charlie Brennan reminded me when I saw him in town this morning. We do not have to go if you would rather not. I know meeting everyone all at once might be overwhelming." Florence wiped flour from her hands, considering. Part of her wanted to hide away in this safe bubble they had created. But another part, the part that was beginning to hope for a real future here, knew she could not avoid the community forever. "I think we should go," she said. "People will want to meet your wife." Yale's expression flickered at the word wife. They had not yet formalized the marriage, both of them dancing around the subject. The local preacher had agreed to perform the ceremony whenever they were ready, but Yale had not pressed, and Florence had been grateful for his patience. "Are you certain?" he asked. "Yes. Besides, I have barely seen Chloride. It will be good to meet our neighbors." The next evening, Florence put on her best dress, a green cotton gown that was several years out of fashion but still respectable. She arranged her hair carefully, pinning it up with the few good hairpins she had left. When she emerged from her room, Yale was waiting in clean, pressed clothes, his hair neatly combed, and he stared at her with open admiration. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Florence felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." The ride into town was comfortable now, so different from that first journey. Florence found herself relaxing against the wagon seat, watching the landscape pass in the golden light of early evening. Yale pointed out various landmarks, telling stories about the area, and she listened with genuine interest. Chloride was bustling when they arrived, at least by its standards. Wagons and horses crowded the street near the church, and music drifted from the hall. Yale helped Florence down and offered his arm, which she took, feeling the solid strength of him through his sleeve. Inside, lanterns cast warm light over a crowd of perhaps 50 people, ranch families and townspeople dressed in their finest. A small group of musicians played fiddle and guitar in one corner, and couples were already dancing. Conversations paused as Yale and Florence entered, dozens of curious eyes turning their way. Yale Yardley, a broad-shouldered man with a friendly face, approached, a pretty blonde woman on his arm. "So the rumors are true. You actually got yourself a bride. Florence, this is Charlie and Martha Brennan. They have the spread adjacent to ours. Charlie, Martha, my wife Florence." The word came out smoothly, naturally, though they both knew it was not technically true yet. Martha smiled warmly and took Florence's hand. "We are so pleased to meet you. You must come for dinner soon. I have been dying for another woman to talk to. These men only want to discuss cattle and weather." More introductions followed, a blur of names and faces. The postmaster, the general store owner, several other ranching families, the school teacher, Miss Patricia Walker, who looked to be about Florence's age and seemed genuinely friendly. Most people were welcoming, though Florence caught some speculative looks from a few of the older women, clearly assessing the mail-order bride who had come to claim one of their town's eligible bachelors. When the music started up again, Yale turned to her. "Would you like to dance?" Florence had not danced since before her father died, but she found herself nodding. Yale led her onto the floor and took her in his arms, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers gently. They moved together to a simple waltz, and Florence was surprised by how naturally Yale led, how comfortable it felt to follow. "You dance well," she said. "My mother insisted I learn. She said it was a necessary social skill." Yale smiled down at her. "I am glad she did. This is nice." It was nice, Florence realized. More than nice. There was something almost magical about moving together in the lamplight, surrounded by music and people but somehow in their own small world. She could feel the warmth of his hand through her dress, the solid presence of him close to her. When was the last time someone had held her with such careful respect? When had she last felt this safe? The evening passed in a pleasant blur of dancing, conversation, and food from the tables laden with offerings from various households. Florence found herself genuinely enjoying the company, especially Martha Brennan and Patricia Walker, who both made efforts to include her and make her feel welcome. As the night wound down and they prepared to leave, Yale helped Florence into the wagon and tucked a blanket around her against the cooling air. The ride home was quiet, both of them tired but content. "Did you have a good time?" Yale asked as they neared the ranch. "I did," Florence said, and realized she meant it completely. Everyone was very welcoming. They are good people, a bit rough around the edges maybe, but honest and kind when it counts. He paused, then added softly, "I was proud to introduce you as my wife tonight. Even though we have not made it official yet, I hope that was all right." Florence's heart thumped hard. It was all right. But Yale, we should discuss that, the marriage. I know we have been avoiding the subject. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house but did not move to get down. In the moonlight, his face was serious, almost nervous. "I have been waiting for you to feel ready. I do not want to pressure you into anything, Florence. I meant what I said about giving you time." "You have given me time," Florence said quietly. "Nearly 3 weeks. You have shown me nothing but kindness and patience. You have proven yourself to be exactly what you promised. A good man. I think we should marry properly, make this real." Yale turned to look at her fully, his eyes searching hers in the darkness. "Are you certain? You do not have to rush just because people in town assume we already are married." "I am certain." And she was. The fear and dread she had carried across the country had been replaced by something entirely different: trust, respect, and the beginning of something deeper, something that made her heart race when Yale smiled at her, made her hyper-aware of his presence, made her imagine a future that held more than just survival. "Then we will speak to Reverend Matthews tomorrow," Yale said, his voice rough with emotion. "We will do this properly, Florence. I want to marry you with witnesses and vows and everything right." They married 3 days later in the small Chloride church, with Charlie and Martha Brennan standing as witnesses. Florence wore the green dress again, with some white ribbons Martha had given her woven into her hair. Yale wore his best suit and held her hand like it was something precious, as Reverend Matthews led them through their vows. "Do you, Yale Yardley, take Florence Katherine to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" "I do," Yale said firmly, his eyes never leaving Florence's face. "And do you, Florence Katherine, take Yale Yardley to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" Florence took a breath, thinking about the journey that had brought her here, all the fear and desperation that had driven her west. And then she thought about wildflowers and gentle smiles and patient hands. She thought about a man who talked to chickens and gave up his bed so she could feel safe. She thought about the way her heart had started to open despite her determination to keep it guarded. "I do," she said clearly. When Yale kissed her, soft and brief and respectful, Florence felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening to let in light. They were truly married now. This was real. And instead of the terror she had expected to feel, there was only a warm, growing certainty that somehow, against all odds, she might have found something rare and precious. The Brennans insisted on hosting a small celebration dinner, and the four of them spent the afternoon eating and laughing and toasting the newlyweds. Martha pulled Florence aside at one point, her expression kind. "You are good for Yale," she said. "I have known him for 5 years, and I have never seen him this happy. He is a wonderful man. I am glad he found you." "I am glad too," Florence said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. When they finally returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, Yale helped Florence down from the wagon and stood for a moment, just looking at her. "This is your home now," he said. "Truly yours. I want you to feel that, Florence. Everything I have is yours too." Florence reached up and touched his face, her fingers brushing the rough stubble of his jaw. It was the first time she had initiated any physical contact beyond what was necessary, and she felt him go very still under her touch. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. For the flowers that first day, for your patience, for treating me with such respect. You have given me back something I thought I had lost forever." "What is that?" Yale asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Hope," Florence said simply. He covered her hand with his, holding it against his face, and in his eyes she saw the reflection of everything she was beginning to feel: wonder, gratitude, and the tender early stages of love. That night, when Florence moved her few belongings from the small room into Yale's bedroom, their bedroom now, she was nervous but not afraid. Yale was gentle and patient, taking his time, constantly checking that she was comfortable and willing. And when they came together as husband and wife truly for the first time, it was with a tenderness that made Florence's eyes sting with tears of relief and something deeper. Afterward, lying in Yale's arms in the darkness, listening to his steady heartbeat under her ear, Florence felt a peace she had not known in years. The journey west had been long and frightening. The choice to become a mail-order bride had seemed like a last desperate gamble. But here, in this quiet moment, she understood that sometimes the things we fear most lead us exactly where we need to be. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Florence's life. She and Yale fell into a comfortable partnership, working together to maintain the ranch and build a real home. Florence proved to have a talent for keeping accounts, and soon she was managing the ranch's finances with an efficiency that impressed Yale. She expanded the garden, and by late summer they had fresh vegetables to supplement their diet and even some extra to sell in town. More importantly, they grew to know each other deeply. Yale proved to be a man of quiet strength and unexpected humor, always ready with a gentle word or a helping hand. Florence discovered sides of herself she had not known existed: a capacity for physical labor, a love of the wild landscape, a talent for dealing with difficult cattle and stubborn chickens, and they fell in love, truly and completely. It happened gradually, in small moments. The way Yale always made sure Florence had the best portions at meals, how Florence would wait on the porch for him to return from the far pastures, the stolen kisses when they passed each other during the day, the long nights wrapped in each other's arms. In September, Patricia Walker came to visit, and she and Florence quickly became close friends. Patricia was bright and funny, with a sharp mind and a kind heart. She taught at the small schoolhouse in town and loved to share books with Florence, giving her access to literature she had sorely missed. "You and Yale seem so happy," Patricia observed one afternoon as they sat on the porch shelling peas. "It is unusual for a mail-order marriage. Most of them are much more practical with little real affection." "I know," Florence said softly. "I feel incredibly fortunate. I expected so much worse." "Yale is a good man," Patricia agreed. "One of the best. You are lucky to have found each other." As autumn painted the desert in shades of gold and red, the ranch prospered. Yale sold a portion of his herd at good prices, and they discussed plans for expanding. Florence suggested buying more chickens and perhaps some goats for milk and cheese, which could provide another income stream. Yale listened to her ideas with respect, valuing her opinion and often implementing her suggestions. In October, Florence began to suspect she might be pregnant. Her courses were late, and she felt queasy in the mornings. The realization filled her with a complex mixture of emotions: joy at the thought of a child, fear of childbirth in such a remote location, and a deep desire to give Yale the family he had lost so young. She waited until she was certain before telling him. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, as had become their evening ritual, when she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "I think there is going to be 3 of us come next spring," she said quietly. Yale's eyes went wide, his face transforming with such pure joy that Florence felt her own eyes fill with tears. "Truly, you are certain?" "As certain as I can be. I thought I should wait to tell you until I was sure." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and she felt him trembling. "A baby," he whispered. "Florence, I never thought. I am so happy. Are you happy? Are you scared? What do you need?" "I am happy," Florence assured him, holding him tight. "A little scared, but happy. We will figure it out together." From that moment, Yale became even more protective and attentive. He insisted Florence rest more, not lift heavy objects, not overwork herself. She found it both endearing and occasionally frustrating, but she understood it came from love and his own fear of loss. Winter in the Arizona desert was milder than the Philadelphia winters Florence remembered, but there were still cold nights and occasional freezes. She spent the shorter days preparing for the baby, sewing tiny clothes from fabric Yale brought from town, fixing up a corner of their bedroom to serve as a nursery. Martha Brennan visited often, sharing advice from her own experiences with her 3 children. On a cold January morning in 1883, Yale rode out to check on the cattle in the north pasture. Florence was making bread, her pregnant belly making the work more awkward but not impossible. She was nearly 6 months along now, feeling the baby move regularly, those flutters and kicks that never failed to amaze her. She had just set the dough to rise when she heard unfamiliar voices outside. Through the window, she saw 3 rough-looking men approaching the house on horseback. Her heart began to pound. Yale had warned her that occasionally drifters passed through, and while most were harmless, some were not. Florence quickly locked the door and moved away from the window. She could hear the men talking, their voices harsh and demanding. "Anyone home? We need supplies and fresh horses. Come on out now." Florence stayed silent, her hand protectively over her belly. Yale had shown her where he kept his rifle, and she moved quietly to retrieve it. She had never fired a gun in her life, but she would protect herself and her unborn child if she had to. "We know someone is here. Saw smoke from the chimney. Better to be friendly about this." One of the men tried the door, rattling the handle. Florence raised the rifle with shaking hands, pointing it at the door. "Go away," she called out, trying to sound braver than she felt. "My husband will be back any moment, and he is heavily armed." The men laughed, and Florence heard them conferring in lower tones. Her heart was hammering so hard she felt dizzy. "Please," she prayed silently, "please let Yale come home. Please let them leave." What happened next was a blur. One of the men kicked at the door, and Florence heard wood beginning to splinter. She aimed the rifle, her finger on the trigger, knowing she would have to shoot if they got inside. But before the door could give way, a gunshot rang out from outside, and the kicking stopped abruptly. "Step away from that house right now." Yale's voice, hard and dangerous in a way Florence had never heard. I have a clear shot at all three of you, and I will not hesitate if you do not mount up and ride out immediately. We do not want trouble, friend, just need supplies. And I am telling you to leave. There is a general store in Chloride 5 miles south. Go buy your supplies there. This is private property and you are not welcome. There was a tense moment of silence. Then Florence heard the sound of men mounting horses, grumbling but complying. She stayed frozen, the rifle still raised, until she heard Yale's voice again, gentle now. "Florence, honey, they are gone. You can open the door." Her hands were shaking so badly she almost could not work the lock. When the door finally opened, Yale was there, his rifle in one hand, his face pale. He took in the sight of her holding his other rifle, her obvious terror, and set his gun aside to pull her into his arms. "You are safe," he murmured into her hair. "I am so sorry I was not here. I saw them from the ridge and rode back as fast as I could." "I was so scared," Florence gasped, finally letting the tears come. "I did not know what to do. I thought of the baby and I just knew I had to protect us." "You did perfectly," Yale said fiercely. "You were brave and smart." "But God, Florence, if anything had happened to you or the baby because I was not here to protect you." His voice broke, and she realized he was as shaken as she was. They stood holding each other for a long time, both trembling with the aftermath of fear. Finally, Yale pulled back and looked at her seriously. "I am going to teach you to shoot properly," he said. "I should have done it before now, and I am going to talk to Charlie about keeping a closer eye on this place when I am out on the range. I will not risk you like that again." True to his word, Yale spent the next several weeks teaching Florence to handle the rifle and a pistol. She proved to be a decent shot, and the knowledge that she could defend herself if necessary gave her confidence. Yale also arranged with Charlie Brennan to check in regularly when Yale had to be away from the house for extended periods. As winter faded into spring, Florence grew larger with the baby. By April, she was uncomfortable and anxious, counting down the days. Martha had promised to be there for the birth, along with old Mrs. Henderson, who served as the closest thing Chloride had to a midwife. On a warm evening in late April, Florence's labor began. Yale rode for Martha and Mrs. Henderson, his face tight with worry, while Florence breathed through the contractions and tried not to panic. The birth was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Yale paced outside the bedroom door, nearly out of his mind with fear, until finally, as the sun reached its zenith, a baby's cry rang out. Martha opened the door, smiling tiredly. "You have a son, Yale, and Florence is asking for you." Yale burst into the room to find Florence propped up in bed, sweaty and exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with such love and pride that his heart felt too big for his chest. "Meet your son," she said softly. Yale approached almost fearfully, looking down at the impossibly small face peeking out from the blankets. The baby had dark hair like Florence and a red, wrinkled face that was already impossibly precious. As Yale watched, tiny eyes opened, revealing a color that might someday be similar to his own creek water green. "He is perfect," Yale whispered, his voice choked. "Florence, you are amazing. Thank you for him, for everything." "What should we name him?" Florence asked. They had discussed names but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son, Yale said, "I was thinking about my father's name, Thomas, but I want the choice to be yours too." "Thomas," Florence repeated, testing it. "Thomas Yardley, I like it. Thomas Yale Yardley." "Tommy," Yale said, carefully touching one tiny fist. The baby's fingers wrapped around his, and Yale felt something inside him shift and settle. This was what he had been searching for all those lonely years. This family, this love, this tiny, perfect life he would protect with everything he had. The next weeks were challenging as they adjusted to life with a newborn. Tommy was a hungry, fussy baby who kept them both up at night. Florence was exhausted from nursing and recovering from the birth. But there was also joy in those early days, moments of perfect happiness when Tommy would settle and sleep in Yale's arms, or when Florence would nurse him while Yale sat beside them, his arm around her shoulders, the three of them a unit. As summer arrived, life found a new rhythm. Tommy grew stronger and more alert. Florence regained her strength and gradually resumed her usual activities, though with the baby always nearby. Yale was a devoted father, always ready to walk Tommy when he fussed, to change diapers without complaint, to simply sit and watch his son sleep with wonder on his face. One evening in July, nearly a year after Florence had first arrived, they sat on the porch together. Tommy was asleep in his cradle nearby, and the sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors. Yale had his arm around Florence, and she leaned against him contentedly. "You ever think about what might have happened if you had not come?" Yale asked quietly. "If you had chosen differently?" "Sometimes," Florence admitted, "but I try not to dwell on it. I think things happen as they are meant to. I was supposed to come here. We were supposed to find each other." "I keep thinking about that first day," Yale said. "How terrified you looked when you stepped off that stage coach. I was so worried the flowers were a stupid idea, that you would think I was a fool." "I thought you were a miracle," Florence said softly. "I was bracing myself for a nightmare, and you showed up with flowers and a gentle smile. You gave me hope when I had none left. You gave me everything, Yale." He kissed her temple, holding her close. "You gave me everything too. A family, a partner, a reason to build something beyond just survival. I love you, Florence. I know I do not say it enough, but I do. More than I knew it was possible to love someone." "I love you too," Florence said, turning to kiss him properly. "So much. You are the best man I have ever known and the best father Tommy could ask for." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Tommy stirred and made a small sound, and Yale immediately went to check on him, gently rocking the cradle until the baby settled again. Florence watched her husband's tender care of their son and felt her heart overflow with gratitude and love. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch continued to prosper under their joint management. Florence's business acumen combined with Yale's ranching knowledge made them a formidable team. They expanded the herd, added goats and more chickens as Florence had suggested, and even began raising horses, which proved quite profitable. Tommy grew into a bright, energetic boy with his father's green eyes and his mother's dark hair. He followed Yale around the ranch from the time he could walk, learning about cattle and horses and the land. In 1885, Florence gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, after the gentle mare who had been her first friend at the ranch. 2 years later came another boy, Henry, completing their family. Patricia Walker remained a close friend, visiting regularly and serving as godmother to all 3 children. The Brennans became like family, their children and the Yardley children growing up together. The community of Chloride embraced Florence completely, and she became known as a kind, capable woman who could be counted on in times of need. Florence never forgot where she had come from or the desperate circumstances that had brought her west. In the 1890s, when she learned of other young women in difficult situations back east, she quietly began corresponding with them, offering advice and sometimes financial help. She and Yale even sponsored 2 young women as mail-order brides for lonely ranchers they knew to be good men, carefully vetting the situations to ensure the women would be treated well. "You are giving them what you received," Yale observed one evening as Florence wrote another letter. a chance at a real life. I was so fortunate, Florence said. I arrived expecting cruelty and found kindness instead. If I can help even one other woman find what I found, it is worth it. As the 19th century drew to a close, Yale and Florence sat on their porch one evening as they had countless times before. They were older now, in their 40s, with silver threading through their hair and lines around their eyes from squinting at the bright Arizona sun. But their love had only deepened with time, growing richer and more complex as they weathered challenges and celebrated triumphs together. Tommy was 21 now, a capable young man who was beginning to take on more responsibility at the ranch. He had his father's quiet strength and his mother's sharp mind. Rose, at 18, was beautiful and spirited, already turning heads in town, though she seemed in no hurry to settle down. She helped her mother with the household and the accounts, showing a talent for numbers. Henry, at 16, was still finding his way, more interested in books than ranching, talking about perhaps becoming a teacher or lawyer. "We did well," Yale said, gesturing to the prosperous ranch spread before them. The house had been expanded over the years, a proper second story added when the children were small. The outbuildings were numerous and well maintained. The corrals held fine horses and healthy cattle. It was a far cry from the modest operation Florence had first seen nearly 20 years ago. "We did," Florence agreed, taking his hand. Their fingers intertwined naturally, automatically, the way they had thousands of times over the years. "I think about that girl who stepped off the stage coach sometimes. She was so scared, so certain her life was over. If I could go back and tell her what was waiting for her, tell her about you and the children and this life we would build, she never would have believed it." "I think about the man I was before you came," Yale said. "So lonely I talked to cattle. Going through the motions of living but not really alive. You changed everything, Florence. You made me whole." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the desert in those familiar shades of orange and pink. From inside the house came the sounds of their children, Rose laughing at something Henry said, Tommy playing with the new foal he was training. These were the sounds of home, of family, of a life built on love and respect, and the gentle kindness of a man who had greeted his mail order bride with flowers instead of cruelty. Florence leaned her head on Yale's shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and sun and sage. "Do you remember what I said that first night we truly talked, about how things in the desert find a way to live even in harsh places?" "I remember," Yale said softly. "That is what we did," Florence said. "We found a way to not just live but thrive. We took what could have been merely survival and turned it into something beautiful, into love, into forever," Yale agreed, kissing the top of her head. As darkness fell and stars emerged in the vast Arizona sky, they remained on the porch, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life and a love that would endure. The mail-order bride who had arrived expecting cruelty had instead found the gentlest of souls. The lonely cowboy who had offered flowers and a smile had found a partner in every sense of the word. Together, they had created something rare and precious in the wild expanse of the American West, a true and lasting love story. Inside, Tommy called out that dinner was ready, and Yale and Florence rose, hands still clasped, walking together into the warm light of their home. The children were gathered around the expanded table, and there was laughter and food and the easy comfort of family who genuinely loved one another. This was Yale and Florence's legacy. Not just the land or the successful ranch, but these children raised with love and respect, taught by example that kindness and patience could transform lives. After dinner, as had become tradition on Sunday evenings, the family gathered in the living room. Henry played the guitar he had saved up to buy, and they sang together, familiar songs that made Florence think of her mother and the life she had lost so long ago. But the pain of those memories had faded, replaced by gratitude for the journey that had brought her here. Later, when the children had gone to bed and Yale and Florence prepared for sleep in their own room, Florence caught sight of herself in the mirror. She was no longer the thin, frightened girl of 22 who had stepped off that stagecoach. She was a woman in her prime, strong from years of ranch work, content in a way she had never imagined possible. The shadows under her eyes were gone, replaced by laugh lines. Her hands were calloused from work, but they were the hands of someone who had built something meaningful. Yale came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and meeting her eyes in the mirror. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How different I look from when I arrived," Florence said. "How different I am." "You are still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen," Yale said seriously. "More beautiful now than then, because now I know you completely. I know your strength, your kindness, your sharp mind, your capacity for love. You are extraordinary, Florence Yardley." She turned in his arms to face him properly. "We are extraordinary together," she corrected. "Separately, we might have just survived. Together, we have thrived." They made love that night with the easy familiarity of long married partners who knew each other's bodies intimately but had never lost the spark of desire. Afterward, lying in the darkness, Florence thought about miracles. She had stopped believing in them during those dark days after her father's death. But Yale had taught her to believe again, not in dramatic supernatural intervention, but in the quiet, everyday miracles of kindness, patience, and love freely given. The years continued to roll by peacefully. Tommy eventually married a sweet girl named Julia from a neighboring ranch, and they built a house on Yardley land, planning to take over the operation eventually. Rose surprised everyone by falling in love with Patricia Walker's younger brother Daniel when he came to visit from back east, and they married in a beautiful ceremony at the Chloride Church. Henry did indeed go to university to study law, supported fully by his parents even though it meant he would not follow in ranching. Yale and Florence became grandparents, delighting in Tommy and Julia's children, a girl and 2 boys who ran wild on the ranch much as their father had. They grew older together, their bodies aging but their love never dimming. They still sat on the porch most evenings, still held hands, still looked at each other with the wonder of 2 people who had found something rare and held on to it. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1907, the entire family gathered for a celebration. Tommy and Julia were there with their 3 children. Rose and Daniel had traveled from Phoenix where Daniel practiced architecture, bringing their twin daughters. Henry came from Tucson where he was establishing his law practice. Charlie and Martha Brennan joined them, older now but still dear friends. Patricia Walker, now married herself with children, came with her family. The house was full of noise and laughter and love. A long table had been set up outside, laden with food prepared by many hands. As the sun began to set, casting that golden Arizona light over everything, Tommy stood to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass. "They built more than just a successful ranch. They built a family founded on love and respect. They showed all of us what a true partnership looks like, what it means to face life together with kindness and strength. Dad, Mom, thank you for everything you have given us. Thank you for showing us how to love well." There were murmurs of agreement and raised glasses all around. Florence felt tears prickling her eyes as she looked at Yale, finding him already looking at her with such love that her breath caught. "I am the luckiest man alive," Yale said quietly, for her ears only. Every single day since you stepped off that stagecoach has been a gift. We are both lucky, Florence said, squeezing his hand. We found each other when we both needed finding. We built this life together. That is what I am most proud of. Not the land or the success, but this family, this love. As the celebration continued around them, Yale pulled Florence into a dance, right there on their own land under the vast Arizona sky. Their children and grandchildren watched, smiling, seeing in their aging parents the love story that had shaped all their lives. Tommy and Julia danced too, and Rose and Daniel, each couple creating their own small moment of connection. Florence rested her head against Yale's chest as they swayed, listening to his heartbeat, steady and strong even after all these years. She thought about that terrified girl on the stagecoach, clutching her carpet bag and preparing for a life of misery. If she could send a message back through time, what would she say? That sometimes the things we fear most lead us to exactly what we need. That kindness exists even in harsh places. That love can bloom in the desert if you give it room to grow. What are you thinking about? Yale murmured, the same question he had asked her countless times over the years. That I would do it all again, Florence said simply. Every moment, every fear, every uncertainty. Because it all led here to you, to this. I would choose you 1,000 times over, Yale Yardley. And I would wait at that stagecoach stop 1,000 times, Yale said, holding flowers and hoping the woman who stepped down would give me a chance. Best decision I ever made, writing to that agency. Best day of my life when you arrived. They stayed in each other's arms as twilight deepened into night, surrounded by the noise and warmth of their family but lost in their own world, the way they had been since the very beginning. The mail-order bride and the gentle cowboy. Two souls who had found each other across the miles and built something that would last not just their lifetime, but for generations to come. As the party wound down and family members began departing or settling in the guest rooms for the night, Florence and Yale walked through their home one last time, checking that everyone had what they needed. The house was full to bursting. Every bed claimed, children bedded down on the floor in sleeping rolls, the joyful chaos of family gathered together. Finally, they retired to their own room, the same room where they had first come together as husband and wife all those years ago. The bed was the same, though the quilt had been replaced many times. The dresser still held that jar, which Florence still filled with wildflowers when they were in bloom, a reminder of that first bouquet. 25 years, Yale said, sitting on the edge of the bed to remove his boots. Feels like both forever and no time at all. I know what you mean, Florence said, letting down her hair. It was more silver than dark now, but Yale still loved to see it loose around her shoulders. I cannot imagine my life without you. I can barely remember who I was before you. You were strong even then, Yale said. You survived things that would have broken other people. You came all this way alone, knowing you might face cruelty, but doing what you had to do. That took courage. I did not feel courageous, Florence admitted. I felt desperate and scared. Courage is not the absence of fear, Yale said. It is doing what needs to be done despite the fear. You have always been the bravest person I know, Florence. She came to sit beside him, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. They sat like that for a while, comfortable in the silence in each other's presence. Outside, they could hear coyotes singing in the distance, the sound that had frightened Florence on her first night but had long since become as familiar as a lullaby. You think we did right by them? Florence asked suddenly. The children. Do you think we gave them what they needed? I think we gave them the most important thing, Yale said. We showed them what real love looks like. We taught them respect and kindness and hard work. The rest they will figure out on their own, just like we did. But they have a foundation, Florence. They know they are loved and they know how to love others. What more could we give them? Florence nodded, reassured. She knew Yale was right. Their children were good people, building good lives, and that was more than many could say. As they lay down together that night, fitting against each other the way they had for 25 years, Florence thought about endings and beginnings. This anniversary felt like a milestone, marking a quarter-century of marriage, but it did not feel like an ending. It felt like a continuation of something that would outlast even their own lives, living on in their children and grandchildren and the love they had all witnessed. "Yale," she whispered into the darkness. "Yes, honey. Thank you for the flowers." She felt him smile against her hair. "Thank you for saying yes." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had taken a chance on each other and won something infinitely precious. The mail-order bride who had arrived expecting cruelty had found tenderness instead. The lonely cowboy who had offered flowers and a smile had found his soulmate. Together, they had built a life that stood as proof that love, real and true and lasting, could bloom even in the harshest desert, could thrive against all odds, could transform two lonely souls into one beautiful, unbreakable whole. And outside, under the vast Arizona sky, the desert night sang its ancient song, the same song it had sung when a frightened young woman first arrived and a gentle man first offered her hope. The land that had witnessed their first meeting now held their home, their family, their legacy. The Wild West had been tamed not by violence or force, but by two people who chose kindness and built something lasting from that simple choice. Their love story would be told for generations, passed down through the family they had created. A reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures begin not with grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but with something as simple as flowers and a gentle smile.